administrations has not worked, that policy being not to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He says it's now time for a new approach and that he believes this recognition will help to advance the peace process. Those were the words that he used, and he made it clear that it is not intended to reflect as a departure from the US's strong commitment to lasting peace in the Middle East. But of course, many of the critics of this decision are saying, well, how now can the US be viewed as a neutral mediator in that Middle East peace process when they seemingly have taken such an obvious side?
And, you know, there are passionate views on all sides in this, but has it been outlined by anyone in the administration exactly how this might advance the peace process?
No, there really hasn't been any kind of nitty-gritty on policy, on what the reasons behind it are. In fact, a lot of analysts suggesting that the only thing that they can see that is behind this decision is that it ticks off one of those promises that Donald Trump made on the campaign trail, and it appeases his right-wing evangelical base who wanted to see this happening. Okay,
and there was also been a bit of talk about the pro-Israel American Jews, including this guy, Sheldon Adelson, I think his name is, an LA casino magnate who's apparently donated a lot of money to Donald Trump. Now, what do you assess as the relevance of appeasing that person?
Absolutely. Certainly that kind of sector that Jewish lobby did provide a lot of financial support to the Trump campaign, and certainly he really mobilised them by suggesting that this was going to be one of his policy priorities, and so he has indeed fulfilled that promise, and certainly that will have been I'm sure, part of his thinking. But of course, there is a large number of American Jews who are much more liberal in their outlook and in fact are not happy with this decision. But certainly that faction that supported Donald Trump both financially and openly, if you like, on his campaign trail will be very pleased by this. Donald Trump had some pretty low poll ratings come out in the US yesterday, a 35% approval rating. He is trying to re-energize his base, you know, get people back to supporting him, and many analysts are suggesting that this is kind of an easy hit for him to do, and perhaps he didn't really think out the long-term consequences.
Okay. Normally your Secretary of State would be dealing with a lot of this. Rex Tillerson does not look to have played a big part in this, and Jared Kushner, of course Trump's son-in-law and a close advisor to him, seems to have been doing a lot of the running here. Is that your assessment?
Absolutely. This is Jared Kushner's baby, if you like. Rex Tillerson is very much out in the cold on this. We haven't heard him make any major foreign policy speeches on it. In fact, he is at a NATO meeting currently, and just about every single other foreign Secretary of State, foreign secretary there, has been almost berating him about this decision of the Trump administration and saying how much displeasure they find with it and condemning it. And he has had to just, he has been supporting the president, saying he believes it's the right thing to do. But certainly he has got, as far as we know, very little hands-on involvement in this. Jared Kushner, on the other hand, has made several trips to the Middle East, to Israel, and is said to be supportive of this decision.
And just finally, when would the American embassy move to Jerusalem?
Well, that it depends what you see. Certainly, we were told on background yesterday that this would be a long process. They need to find somewhere for it to be located, and they need to build it and deal with all the security ramifications of that. So there is a suggestion that this will not be an immediate decision. But some analysts suggest, well, you could simply there's currently a consulate in Jerusalem, and you could just kind of change the sign on the door and make that the embassy. But we understand that it will be a longer term thing. They need to find, the State Department has been given permission now to try and find a location and begin that process. So it is not going to be, we're told by the administration, as quick as that.
Thanks very much, Kate. Appreciate your time. Kate Fisher in Washington, 8:20.
A man has been remanded in custody after appearing in court accused of a plot to bomb Downing Street security gates and then to continue the attack with a knife and suicide vest in a bid to kill Prime Minister Theresa May. A second man also appeared in court charged with preparing terrorist act. Both suspects were detained last week. The BBC's June Kelly reports from London's Westminster Magistrates Court.
This was a first appearance at Westminster Magistrates Court, and as is usual in these counter-terrorism investigations, it came amid intense security. Now, in the dock, we had two men. The first defendant, Nayamur Zachariah Rahman, he is 20 years of age, and he'd said he was a British Bangladeshi. Now, he is accused of planning an attack on Downing Street, and what the allegations are that he was actually proposing to set off an improvised explosive device, that's a bomb in other words, at the gates of Downing Street. And then in the ensuing chaos, it's claimed his plan was to get into Downing Street equipped with a suicide vest, a knife and a pepper spray and kill the Prime Minister Theresa May. In court documents it says, with a view to trying to kill the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Theresa May MP. Beside him in the dock is co-defendant. This is a 20-year-old man, Mohammed Akib Ibrahim. He's from Birmingham. Now, he is facing separate charges of planning terrorist acts. These do not relate to Downing Street. They relate to travel overseas. And the first defendant, Rahman, is accused of trying to help him in this plan. At this stage, because this is a first hearing, the men did not enter any plea. They have been remanded in custody, and their next appearance will be later this month, and that will be at the more senior court, the Old Bailey.
The BBC's June Kelly reporting, 8:22.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the government is not planning to follow Australia's move and ban foreign political donations. The Australian government has unveiled their strategy to ban political donations from overseas and introduce a register for foreign lobbyists. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Under New Zealand law, political donations from overseas are allowed as long as they don't exceed $1,500. Jacinda Ardern says different jurisdictions have their own regimes and also their own issues.
When it comes to some of the issues that have been raised by Australia, I haven't seen evidence of the kinds of issues they're talking about here in New Zealand, but that's not to say that we should be complacent. We have to be vigilant, and we are.
Ms Ardern says she hasn't seen any advice that foreign nations have any undue influence in New Zealand.
In that area, we must constantly be vigilant, but in the way that Australia has raised it with their donations, we of course have our own regime. That means anything over $1,500, that person must declare who they are and must be transparent.
Nationals leader Bill English says New Zealand's political donation regime is very transparent and he's comfortable with the status quo. He says there is always some influence from offshore, but it's nothing new.
Like Greenpeace, for instance, is a global NGO, and where New Zealand's often, from what I can see, part of their international campaigns. You have other interests around who I'm sure who aren't purely New Zealand interests who try and influence politics. Pharmaceutical companies are another big influence on politics. They run high-profile advertising and political campaigns, and they are foreign-owned.
The Deputy Prime Minister and New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says National has always found a way round the donations regime.
They have auctions, they have $1,000 plate dinners, they raise funds for other parties doing that at the Northern Club, and better get any controversy whatsoever.
Australia is also considering bringing in a register for foreign lobbyists. The Green Party leader James Shaw says his party has long called for a register of all lobbyists.
We've always stood for much greater transparency around lobbying. You might remember, a former colleague of mine, Holly Walker, put a bill into Parliament, which unfortunately other parties defeated. But we would like to see some more moves made on transparency around lobbying in New Zealand, whether that is foreign or domestic.
Atu i te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ata nei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
It's 8:24. Hotter days and nights, presumably. More floods, frequent landslides from rising sea levels are on the cards for Auckland by the end of the century. A NIWA report commissioned by the Auckland Council shows sea levels could rise by 30 centimetres by the year 2050. And that sort of rise could cause damage to homes and cause coastal erosion. Laura Tupou went to the East Auckland suburb of St Heliers, where she spoke to locals about the changing landscape.
As a little girl, I used to come along the beach and look at periwinkles and starfish and crabs. That's all gone. It all went when they started to develop in the city. And I used to go to St Heliers School, and we used to come down and do site shore visits and stuff and look at the study the seashore. It's all gone. It's all eroded. It's all gone. It's really sad.
That's Glynis Gibson. She's now a grandmother and still visits St Heliers. She says she's worried about the effects of climate change and disappointed her grandchildren won't be able to experience the land as she has. Not everyone is concerned though. Plumber Dartagnan Imelman says the extreme weather already being experienced has been good for his company.
Business? I love it. Being a plumber, you give me more business. You give me more... I'm a trainer, so yeah. I've got more business, I've got more income, but on a personal level, yeah, of course, we have to be concerned about it. What are we doing about the climate?
Niwa says sea levels will rise by at least 30 centimetres, exacerbating coastal erosion and the likelihood of landslides. But Auckland Council's Chief Engineer Sarah Sinclair says the report gives the council time to plan.
We are really fortunate that the way sea level rise will be experienced in Auckland will be slow at first. So I'm not going to say we'll do X, Y, Z because we've got time to plan and do it properly, and that's why we're doing this now, so that we don't have to jump into knee-jerk reactions.
The council's Chief Sustainability Officer, John Morrow, says the changing landscape is something that's already being factored into new designs.
We do see changes in infrastructure like the Northwest Motorway, where we actually are building differently because of sea level rise. So it's not to negate the fact that this is already happening. You know, we're already seeing those changes. We've got a little bit of time, but it will get more severe over time.
But it's not just the flooding and erosion that could change the face of the city. Auckland experiences about 20 days a year at or above 25 degrees Celsius. By the end of the century, it could be nearly 100 days. Even though it means more days at the beach, it also means more energy will be spent on cooling and the risk of fires increases. New tropical pests and diseases could also be introduced. Auckland District Health Board's Chief Executive Elsa Clare says it's having to plan for higher concentrations of air pollution, increased temperatures and waterborne diseases. Jared Ngatai Modi is a father. He says he wants everyone to do their bit, but is afraid that won't be the case.
If it's going to happen, I guess it's inevitable, eh?
So it's almost like you can't really do much about it.
Well, it depends. If everyone wants to do it, yeah, it can work, but 99% chance it's not going to happen.
Mō te hōtaka o te ata, ko Laura Tūpoaho.
28 minutes past 8 now.
Yes.
It's not just Auckland secondary schools that are failing to attract teachers. Most secondary schools wrap up in the next week, and some rural principals say they're expecting sleepless nights over summer about starting the school year short of teaching staff. Carol Stiles reports.
You'll find Pew Pew College an hour-and-a-half drive southwest of Hamilton on the road to New Plymouth. It's a composite school with 174 students from Year 7 to Year 13. Its principal, Johan van der Venter, says he had 5 vacancies to fill for next year, which doesn't sound like many, but when you have just 17 teaching staff, it's 30% of the workforce. He's still looking for 2 teachers, one to teach maths and the other for Year 7 and 8. He says potential applicants are put off by the isolation.
Young teachers are looking for a lifestyle. They're probably looking at setting up a partnership. There's employment of the partner that they need to look at. And there's lifestyle activities. If you're in the cities, you know, got the urban cafe lifestyle and that kind of culture that exists. You've got to really be an outdoors person and an adventurous person to live in rural spots.
Mr van der Venter says he markets the benefits of living in a rural community in the job adverts.
So you've got a wonderful rural school that's small and intimate, it's family orientated, and look at the everybody knows each other. That's how we have to sell it.
Taihape Area School in the centre of the North Island has a roll of 260 and caters for new entrants through to school leavers. About half the school is secondary school age. Its principal, Richard McMillan, says he's still looking for 3 teachers to teach maths, science and English. He says the jobs were advertised months ago and has had to re-advertise.
We've had some applicants in overseas countries, but people who
Mr McMillan says there are simply not enough teachers in New Zealand, let alone teachers prepared to move to rural areas.
I mean, going back a few years in the primary sector, there used to be a bar put on our salaries unless people actually moved out into the country service. That was a really fantastic thing. One, it got teachers moving around, and two, it got people out into rural areas experiencing rural life. It didn't suit everyone, but for some, the lifestyle appealed to them.
The president of the Secondary Principals Association, Michael Williams, says rural teaching positions have long been difficult to fill. And he says provincial schools, not rural schools, are benefiting from the exodus of teachers from Auckland, escaping the high cost of living. Mr Williams says principals across the country are having to be creative to fill the gaps for next year, pulling former teachers out of retirement and upskilling staff so they can teach a broader range of subjects.
Unfortunately, principals, secondary team, we've been advising the ministry, the government about this for 18 months to 2 years that we can see this coming, and we haven't been able to get any traction. The government